Tonight, a conspiracy of silence. A former Vatican representative to the U.S. says Pope Francis failed to act in the Theodore McCarrick abuse scandal. We're at the Vatican. Catholic response. Bishops and the faithful react to the latest in the abuse saga. Remembering a Maverick. A look back at the life and legacy of Senator John McCain as the tributes for the American war hero continue. And an Irish blessing. Ireland welcomes the Holy Father for the World Meeting of Families. A recap of his visit amid church scandal. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 27th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Allegations of cover-up come to the Vatican, and Pope Francis remains mum. A former Vatican diplomat released a letter this weekend alleging the Pope knew 5 years ago about sexual misconduct allegations against disgraced ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and did nothing about it until recently. The accusations are forcing bishops and priests around the country to address the latest in the sex abuse crisis from the pulpit.
Io ho letto questa mattina.
And Francis told reporters aboard the papal plane yesterday he read the letter but won't comment on it. The letter from Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano comes on the backdrop of the World Meeting of Families, where the Pope celebrated Mass and greeted thousands in Dublin. We will have a report from Ireland coming up. But first, details of the explosive letter by National Catholic Register's Edward Penton.
In a bombshell letter, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano urges Pope Francis to resign over what he calls a conspiracy of silence about McCarrick. And he asks the Holy Father to honestly state when he first learned about the crimes committed by McCarrick, who abused his authority with seminarians and priests. The National Catholic Register first published the letter along with LifeSite News on Sunday, as the Pope wrapped up a 2-day visit to Ireland. In the letter, the 77-year-old former Vatican diplomat says previous Vatican secretaries of state under the last two popes ignored detailed accusations against McCarrick for years. Vigano writes Pope Benedict XVI eventually sanctioned McCarrick in 2009 or 2010 to a lifetime of penance and prayer. Vigano accuses Pope Francis of knowing about McCarrick's behavior in 2013, but rehabilitating him, a claim of cover-up against the pontiff himself. Vigano insists cardinals and bishops knew about McCarrick's conduct. That included Cardinal Donald Wuerl, McCarrick's successor as Archbishop of Washington, D.C. Archbishop Vigano writes, "I myself brought up the subject with Cardinal Wuerl on several occasions, and certainly didn't need to go into detail because it was immediately clear to me that he was fully aware of it." Archbishop Vigano says his conscience dictates the truth be known, as the corruption has reached the very top of the Church's hierarchy. Last month, Pope Francis accepted McCarrick's resignation as cardinal, following a U.S. Church investigation determining that an accusation was credible that he had sexually abused a minor. Since then, another man has come forward, and several former seminarians say McCarrick sexually abused them.
Edward Penton broke this story and joins us from Rome. Who is Archbishop Vigano? Ed, his critics say he has an axe to grind. Is he credible?
A lot of people say that he is, Lauren, because he comes with a history of standing up against corruption here in the Vatican. Back in 2010, 2011, he stood up against financial corruption here, and that's one of the reasons why he was sent to the nunciature in Washington, because some people weren't happy with the truth that he was telling. So he has a history of being a whistleblower. He has a well-known reputation as a man of integrity. In fact, his number two at the nunciature came out today saying that he's never worked for somebody better than Archbishop Vigano, and as a man of such integrity. So he does seem to have a lot of credibility, yeah.
But there are reports that he was sent back to Rome because he met with Kim Davis, who at the time was a clerk in Kentucky opposed to same-sex marriage. Is there truth to the fact that he and the Pope do not get along?
I don't know about that. I think they clearly have a difference in vision, but I think the Kim Davis thing was something which I think a lot of people supported, and obviously he did. But I think there were people around the Holy Father who didn't like that, and that's where the differences lay. But as far as any personal differences are, whether there are any, I'm not sure whether there are, but certainly perhaps a difference in approach to the way the church is run.
The Pope says that he read Vigano's letter, but he is refusing to comment. What do you make of that response? Was it the right thing to say?
Well, I think it's mainly a sort of stalling tactic, I think, by the Pope. I think this is the general way it's being seen, is that he's wanting to see what us journalists come up with and whether we can corroborate a lot of the allegations that are made by Archbishop Vigano in his testimony. And I think he was given such a short time that I think he said, well, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see what comes out. And he's sort of handing it over to us, the challenge to us journalists to come up with the truth and see what can be verified and corroborated.
Many high-ranking Vatican officials, though, are also implicated in this letter. Is there fallout at the Vatican today?
Well, people are really quite quiet about this. There's obviously a lot of discussion whether the Pope might resign because of it or not. The fact that this issue has now gone global, the Cardinal McCarrick or ex-Cardinal McCarrick scandal has now moved from the United States to having a more global audience, a global attention. But also what's being discussed is the safety of Archbishop Vigano. A lot of people are concerned, and he himself is concerned for his own life. He fears that by coming forth with a lot of these allegations, his life is actually in danger. We don't actually know where he's living.
So what is the Pope going to do now? You have Archbishop Vigano, who is retired. You have the Pope charged with making sure that the scandal is addressed to the faithful.
Yes, I mean, it's impossible to know really what's going to happen. These are completely uncharted territory here. I mean, we've never had this before. We've never had a prelate, at least in modern history, calling for the Pope's resignation. So we don't know what's going to happen here. But I think things are going to continue for the next days and weeks, and we're going to find out generally what sort of revelations can be found from journalistic inquiries, and whether these allegations can be corroborated. I think it all depends really on that, and whether this story continues beyond the next few days.
Well, EWTN will be asking those questions. Thank you so much, Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register.
Thank you, Lauren.
The president of the U.S. Bishops says he wants a full investigation into the allegations in Archbishop Vigano's letter. In a statement today, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo says, quote, "The questions raised deserve answers that are conclusive and based on evidence. Without those answers, innocent men may be tainted by false accusation, and the guilty may be left to repeat sins of the past." Cardinal DiNardo also says he is eager to meet with the Pope to discuss the bishop's plans for more transparency in investigating church leaders. Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington is denying allegations he covered up for his predecessor, Theodore McCarrick, and he defends his actions as Bishop of Pittsburgh, saying the Pennsylvania grand jury investigation is flawed. The Archdiocese of Washington released a statement today saying the cardinal never received information from the Holy See about McCarrick's behavior or about sanctioning him to a life of prayer and penance. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has reaction to this piece of the story from outside of St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Many of the faithful are upset after the latest accusation against their shepherd, Cardinal Donald Wuerl. He's already being questioned about what he knew and when as Archbishop of Washington and before as Bishop of Pittsburgh. Some longtime parishioners are frustrated.
I remember sitting there with my fist clenched, sort of, kind of shaking my head saying this is all wrong.
Craig Montesano says he and his family aren't sure if they still want to attend Mass here at the Cathedral of St. Matthew. Montesano has been coming here for over 10 years and even serves as a lector.
He was saying we when, he really failed to take any personal culpability for the problem. So it was sort of he was setting it up and framing it as joint liability rather than saying, no, this was my problem. This is the problem of my own making.
Wuerl was presiding over a Mass for healing to pray for the church in the wake of the clergy's sex abuse crisis. He did not cite the specific allegations, speaking more generally about the need for prayer and asking for God's grace.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Over the weekend, some Catholic groups called for Cardinal Wuerl's resignation and for wider accountability among bishops. In his letter, Archbishop Vigano called Wuerl a liar, saying he spoke to Wuerl several times about McCarrick, warning him not to allow McCarrick to live close to seminarians. A few American bishops are responding to the allegations. Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas says, quote, "Let us be clear that they are still allegations, but as your shepherd, I find them to be credible. Using this standard, the response must be a thorough investigation similar to those conducted any time allegations are deemed to be credible." And Bishop David Conderla of Tulsa, Oklahoma writes, "The allegations he details mark a good place to begin the investigations that must happen in order for us to restore holiness and accountability to the leadership of the Church." Cardinal Wuerl's spokesperson says he won't step down. Another cardinal named in the letter, Blaise Cupich of Chicago, is also disputing Archbishop Vigano's allegations against him. Cupich denies claims that Theodore McCarrick is the person responsible for elevating him to the Archbishop of Chicago. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from outside of the Cathedral of St. Matthew. Coming up later in the show, Professor Robert George of Princeton joins us to discuss this growing scandal. He says the latest news moves the Church from disaster to catastrophe. Pope Francis issued a sweeping apology Sunday for the crimes of the Catholic Church in Ireland. The Holy Father says church officials didn't respond with compassion, truth, or justice to the many children and women who were abused for generations. EWTN Ireland's Tracy Harkin reports.
Pope Francis was treated to a performance of traditional Irish dance in Dublin during the 9th World Meeting of Families on Saturday evening. In a speech at Croke Park, he told the crowd there is no such thing as a perfect family without forgiveness. But the issue of clergy sex abuse overshadowed his visit. Leo Varadkar, Ireland's first openly gay Prime Minister, asked the Pope to address the abuse.
Holy Father, we ask that you use your office and influence to ensure that this is done here in Ireland and also around the world.
And in his first speech, the Holy Father directly addressed abuse.
Ai bambini che nel passato hanno patito situazioni di particolare difficoltà.
While both leaders agreed, however, on this issue, their speeches did reflect opposing viewpoints on life and family issues. He even went further, as expected, to meet privately with abuse victims. On Saturday evening, the Holy Father met for an hour and a half with 8 Irish survivors of clerical, religious and institutional abuse. The Pope paid a visit to a centre for homeless people run by Capuchin Brothers in the very heart of Dublin, and even flew to the Irish National Shrine at Knock, where he prayed at the Apparition Chapel. On Sunday, the morning rain didn't stop some 300,000 pilgrims from attending Mass at Phoenix Park, the very same location where Pope John Paul II celebrated Mass in 1979. And in his last speech in Ireland, the Holy Father called for acts of public penance. Lauren, during his visit, Pope Francis warmly greeted the people of Northern Ireland, affirming the work of peace and reconciliation between all Christians. While Ireland is still struggling with issues such as the recent abortion vote, Pope Francis told journalists on his way home there is still so much faith in Ireland. This is Tracy Harkin in Dublin with EWTN News Nightly.
We will have continuing coverage of the sex abuse scandal and the Church's reaction here on News Nightly. You can also read the latest at the Catholic News Agency and National Catholic Register. Coming up, Remembering a Maverick, we take a look at the life of Senator John McCain, plus reaction from some who knew him well.
Israel never had a greater champion and a greater defender. The state of Israel salutes Senator John McCain.
Remembering John McCain, the war hero, senator, and former presidential nominee, is being honored around the country and around the world. McCain died on Saturday after battling brain cancer for more than a year. He was 81. The former Vietnam prisoner of war turned his military background into a 35-year political career, taking him from Congress to the Republican presidential nomination. A war hero and a fiery figure in politics for more than 3 decades. The 6-term Republican senator from Arizona was twice thwarted in bids to become president. First in 2000 when the GOP nomination went to George W. Bush, and later in 2008 when he fought back to win the Republican nomination, only to lose to Democrat Barack Obama.
My friends, we have come to the end of a long journey. Please raise your right hand.
Determined not to be defined by his failed campaigns, John McCain returned to the Senate. He was one of the most influential voices in Congress. One of McCain's greatest challenges came early in life when his plane was shot down in Vietnam. The son and grandson of Navy admirals spent more than 5 years as a prisoner of war. Over his long Senate career, McCain had his share of ups and downs. It was as a freshman senator in the late 80s when McCain made what he called the worst mistake of his life, working to help his friend and campaign contributor Charles Keating, who was later convicted of securities fraud. McCain was cited by the Senate Ethics Committee for poor judgment.
I welcome the news that there will be an outside counsel. I think that gives great credibility to whatever conclusions which the Ethics Committee will reach.
McCain would go on to achieve some of his biggest legislative successes working with Democrat and Republican presidents. Even after his brain cancer diagnosis last summer, McCain maintained his resilience, returning to Washington to cast the deciding vote, killing the Obamacare repeal. A longtime public servant who never lost his fighting spirit.
And I'm so grateful to the people of Arizona for the privilege, for the honor of serving here and the opportunities it gives me to play a small role in the history of the country that I love.
McCain is survived by his wife Cindy, their 4 children, and 3 children from a previous marriage. McCain's mother, Roberta, is also alive at the age of 106. Senator McCain will be only the 13th senator to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Tributes are flowing in from both sides of the aisle. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The White House has moved its flag back to half-staff after widespread criticism of raising it during this time of mourning for the late senator. President Trump did come under fire for his silence, but now he says lowering that flag is a mark of respect for McCain's long-standing service. In a farewell statement, Senator John McCain says he lived and died as a proud American. Tonight, McCain's friends remember him.
The warrior's gone.
John McCain was a prisoner of war for 5.5 years during the Vietnam War. He says his faith in God, his fellow prisoners, and his country kept him going.
He's a man of personal faith, but also that he represents the values that they care about. He's pro-life. He has called himself a proudly pro-life conservative Republican his entire career.
Bob Heckman advised McCain in his 2008 run for the presidency.
I think that the thing about John McCain that always sticks in my mind and always will forever is part of the honor code at Episcopal High School, where he went to. One of the items on the honor code says, do the right thing whether or not anyone else is looking. And that's John McCain to a T, I think.
That message was passed on to one of his interns, Henry Barrett.
This internship gave me a lot of hope, for the future. But John McCain really is such an inspiration for people that I think, he's inspired me.
McCain was friends with senators of both parties.
I am mourning, America's mourning, the world is mourning the loss of one of the truly great men of recent decades.
I think this is a part of John McCain that a lot of people don't know about, is that he took younger senators under his wing.
And behind the scenes, Senator John McCain made many of us laugh.
He has a terrific sense of humor. He's always kidding people.
But he also made his friends cry.
He would die for this country. I love him to death.
McCain served in the Senate for 31 years. He had a 100% pro-life voting record on the issue of abortion, until he voted against Obamacare repeal last year. That bill would have also defunded Planned Parenthood. Democratic leader Chuck Schumer wants to rename this building, the Russell Office Building, after John McCain. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. President Trump did not respond to questions about John McCain during an event in the Oval Office today. Instead, he announced a new trade deal with Mexico.
This is something that's very special for our manufacturers and for our farmers from both countries, for all of the people that work for jobs.
The president says he will terminate the existing North American Free Trade Agreement and replace it with a U.S.-Mexico deal. And he says that if Canada wants to put together a fair deal, he will. Or he can increase taxes on Canadian auto imports. Up next, analysis of the clergy's sex abuse scandal with Robert George, a professor at Princeton and a prominent Catholic voice in the public square. There are some Catholics who are disappointed after Pope Francis refused to confirm or deny allegations that he knew about the sexual misconduct of Theodore McCarrick. A prominent professor and Catholic author says he prays the story is not true. Robbie George of Princeton. The allegations, proclaiming them true or false based on ideology, is foolish. Let the facts come out. And joining me now is Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on. I wish we were talking about a happier topic, but thank you for having me.
Me too. Pope Francis has said he is not going to say a single word about Vigano's statement. Many say that the fact that he didn't deny it leaves room for suspicion. In Washington, it's called a non-denial denial. Given the daily calls for transparency in this sex abuse investigation, what do you think the Pope could have said?
Well, let's look forward rather than looking backward. What the Pope should do, I firmly believe, is tell us whether the allegations made by Archbishop Vigano are true or false, or if some are true and others are false, tell us which are true and which are false. I do not think that it's tenable for the Holy Father to simply say what he said on the plane on his way back from Ireland, which is that he's not going to comment on these and he just leaves it to us and to the media to decide for ourselves based on our review of Archbishop Vigano's letter whether what he says is true or false. We really need to know from the Holy Father. Very specific allegations were made by the Archbishop, very specific. They are either true or they.
He asserts in his letter, and he called it testimony, that he personally warned Pope Francis of sexual abuse by former Cardinal McCarrick in 2013. That's 5 years ago, and nothing was done. What do you make of the timing of this statement? Why go public with these allegations now?
I do not know why Archbishop Vigano waited. We should hear more from Archbishop Vigano. He should answer those questions. It's not simply Pope Francis that's the only one who should be telling us more, who should be talking. The Archbishop should be as well, because there are legitimate questions. Evidently, Theodore McCarrick, when, according to Archbishop Vigano, he was under discipline from Pope Benedict, appeared at masses. He said mass. He appeared at other functions. Evidently, at one, Archbishop Vigano himself was there and participating. We need to know what's with that. Why was Archbishop Vigano there? Why did he not blow the whistle on McCarrick violating his disciplinary obligations? So we need to hear more, and we need to withhold our final judgment on these things until the facts are brought out. We need a full and independent investigation, and we need cooperation from everybody involved, from the Holy Father all the way on down. Anybody who knows anything about this needs to speak up.
Let me ask you this. As a Catholic, as a faithful person, I've spoken to many people who say, I don't know what to do anymore. Who do I believe? What do I watch? What do I do? Give us some perspective. What can you tell them?
That's it. You want to know who to believe? Believe Jesus. That's who to believe. Our faith is in Jesus. Our faith is not in Pope Francis or Pope Benedict, or it's not in St. Peter. Our faith is in Jesus Christ. That's what it means to be a Christian. Now, the church is the mystical body of Christ on earth. but that doesn't mean that the members of the church, even the officials of the church, are necessarily free from corruption. The church, including her highest officials, has, over the course of history, on many occasions fallen into corruption. It looks like there's a lot of corruption, a terrible amount of corruption in the church today, and it might go all the way to the top. We don't know all the details, but our faith is not in flesh and blood. Our faith is in Jesus Christ. That's what we believe. And we believe that what the church teaches us is true because Jesus promised us that the gates of hell will never prevail against his church. So let's do our part. Let's remain faithful to the authentic teachings of the church that have been handed down to us from the apostles. We need to distinguish the offices, such as the papacy, from the people who occupy the offices at any particular point. They are frail, fallen human beings. They sin the way we do. But the office has dignity and it has significance, and we have to respect the office while at the same time demanding accountability even from those who are occupying the offices. This is a time of testing for all Catholics, lay Catholics, clergy, all the way up. This is a time of testing, and we must pass the test. And to pass the test, we need three things: fidelity, fidelity, fidelity.
Thank you so much. Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. That does it for us. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.